In Dura Europos, we also find one of the earliest Christian structures. This is going to be a house church or a community house, and it is converted from a private residence, very similar to our synagogue. Remember, both are going to be pressured by the Romans at the time. The Romans can't tell the difference. Your average Roman really can't tell the difference between Christianity and Judaism. Why? Because, well, it's sort of like looking at Islam today from an American perspective. How many people can define the difference between Shia and Sunni? And the answer is not too many. And yet, if you're a member of one of those partitions within Islam, you would see it as being almost a completely different faith in many ways. And so that's how the Romans are looking at them. That's why the Christians are going to be persecuted in large part because not so much they're a threat to the state, but because they're tied to the Jewish peoples who at this point have revolted once in about 77 CE and once in about 134-35 CE against the Roman people. So they become more or less enemies of the state. That's why they're hiding. That's why they're using these structures. Also, they don't have the money to build this massive church. They don't have the tradition for it at this point. We're very, very early on. Christianity, in any way that you might possibly recognize, has existed for less than 100 years at this point. So we're very, very early on. And this is Christian, of course. It's a place of worship, and it's a remodeled private home. It would have held about 70 people. And Christianity is not recognized in any way by the state, by the Romans. The Romans see them as enemies once again. So the numbers remain very, very small. There is some fear of its growing appeal, which will cause Emperor Diocletian to order many persecutions. There's a lot of reasons why that's going to happen. Oftentimes, the issue is scapegoating rather than specifically going after Christianity for their beliefs. It's very easy to say, hey, there's this new group and we're going to blame them and we're going to persecute them for all of the horrible things that are happening at the time. So Christianity isn't really accepted until Constantine comes along with the Edict of Milan in 313, which allows Christians to hold government office. It's not about Rome becoming Christian nearly that early on. So we're well before that. We're a good 70 years before that's going to happen here. What we see is pretty much the earliest surviving Christian narratives. And what we're looking at specifically is this niche around a baptistry, a place where people would be baptized into the Christian faith. And you'll notice I keep saying Christian, not Catholic. That's because Catholicism as a term doesn't really exist until much later in history. At this point, everyone's Christian. There's only one Christian faith. All of that Reformation and the Great Schism and the Anglican Church, that will all come later. But what we're looking at is this arch over, really the arch inside above the baptistry. This is called a lunette. And what we see is an image of the Good Shepherd. Now, when we look at the Good Shepherd, and I'm going to have to pull up my pen here and hope everything works. But here we see this Good Shepherd. And that's really just about our earliest existing image of Jesus. And you'll notice he has short cropped hair, no facial hair. Doesn't really look like the Jesus of our time. He's holding the sheep, which is giving us that sense of a shepherd. Very common imagery even today when we get into Christianity and the idea of Jesus himself. Now, why doesn't he look like Jesus? Well, because our Jesus that we see more typically today with the facial hair and the longer hair and all of that is a product of conversion in Europe, where that is going to be a much more common form. The artist at the time is looking around and going, hey, what do I think Jesus would look like? It's like the first time, if you ever read Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings or any of those books before you saw the movie, you had a very specific image in your head, and it probably was based on what you and the people around you look like. And so that's what we're seeing. The artist is going to understand Jesus as someone who looks like him. That's how we treat protagonists in these literary traditions. We also see Adam and Eve, and here we can see them at the bottom, these two forms. How do we know they're Adam and Eve? Well, Adam and Eve are nude, or mostly nude in this case. They're covering themselves. And they are two of the only figures in Christianity that you can depict in a nude state. It's part of their imagery. They eat from the tree of forbidden knowledge, and some people say it's an apple, but it's not, because they're invented they come from Kazakhstan in the 12th century. In fact, it's just a fruit tree, and they eat of this fruit. They gain the knowledge of morality, of good and evil, and they recognize their own nakedness. And this is all because of the serpent that you see beneath. You see the tree in between them. And the image of Jesus is, again, that sort of shepherd in the field. He doesn't have any of the elements that we would expect in a depiction of Jesus. None of the physical features. He also doesn't have a halo. There's no followers around him. They're only the sheep. It's almost an encoded image. If you were Christian, you understood it. If you weren't Christian, you kind of looked at it and went, why are they worshiping a shepherd? So it does kind of separate those that know and those that don't, but it does become a powerful image because a shepherd is someone that takes care of their flock. Just as Jesus, sort of the ultimate servant leadership, took care of his people, and we are told in Christianity will continue to take care of his people into the afterlife.